whitelisting is really a, I don't know, slang for really what it should be referred to as the positive security model. That slang, you know, there's a lot of different companies using that name, and really what the difference is, and the concept of the positive security model is the same. How they implement it may be a little bit different. Fundamentally, what the positive security model is really defining the known good and denying everything else by default. All right? And that's a very different model than the negative security model, or what's often referred to as blacklisting. In the blacklisting of the negative security model, under that model it says we identify all bad things, threats that may, you know, hurt, you know, or harm an organization that are unauthorized. All right? That list now, to manage that and identify all things, all the different threats in the world, is become unmanageable. It's incredibly long. So a lot of people are interested in what's an alternative to that, and that alternative is the positive security model, which interestingly enough was the original security model. The sheer escalation of the number of malware threats, malicious code, you simply can't keep up with that. It's not effective. Your, you know, processing on the endpoint, we're really talking about antivirus, it just has to go churn through hundreds of thousands of files because so many things have been identified as bad. So inherently the whitelisting is a much simpler, more powerful security tool. From an administration standpoint, I really have to understand my environment because I have to define all of the acceptable applications and the acceptable executables that can run on that endpoint. It's really more secure because you're really limiting the number of things that can load to memory. You know, you're really getting control around that, and once you have control about what loads to memory, you really have a secure state. You can assess whatever you allow access to, you can assess the risk associated with that particular application. And when I talk about that, if you know that executable to be good, okay, and there's no vulnerabilities into it, you really have a very secure environment. The problem with maybe whitelisting is that, well, new vulnerabilities are discovered. So what your known good, you know, your whitelist was really a point in time. At this point in time, all of these executables had no reported vulnerabilities against them. All right? But every 30 days when Microsoft has a Patch Tuesday, that known good changes. So that known good state needs to be maintained and updated. I think that's pretty easy to do on the device side because hardware devices coming into the environment, it's pretty easy for businesses to identify, here's what people need to do their job. That's relatively straightforward. Many of our customers, they initially just turn it on in discovery mode. So you can go and install the software and it's going to report all the different devices that it's seeing on your network, and it's pretty easy for you to develop a policy about, are these, you know, devices really necessary for business? And more importantly, you know, customers don't want to just turn things on and off. They want to allow them to be used securely. So we do things like forcing encryption onto a USB device, registering a USB device to a user, so if they lose that device, we know that the data on it is encrypted. So we really have data loss protection, as well as kind of, you know, data theft from the standpoint. We also do file shadowing. Do we want to keep a copy of all of the data that is copied onto a USB stick, so if we were to terminate an employee, we would know exactly what files they had access to? All right, and we can also set up, you know, file limits. We can limit somebody from, they can really only copy 100 megs worth of data a day onto a USB stick. Nobody's coming in and going to steal 5 gigs. If they have no business reason why they would need to move that kind of data, why allow them to have that permission? So we're offering very granular control, allowing this technology to still be used and have a positive user experience, but do it in a secure manner, and that's what customers are looking for. So that's pretty straightforward. On the application control side, you know, to make that operationally manageable, you know, you kind of have to take things up from the executable level. You absolutely have to operate at the executable level from a security standpoint, but from a management standpoint, people want to operate at an application level. So when they come into an environment, they want to discover what executables are running, and they really need to know what applications those executables are associated with. All right? So we build tools and give them things like a hash library. So really, you know, a hash is really a unique file identifier, all right, that is specific to an executable, or more importantly, a specific version of that executable, all right? So we give you a reference library that kind of tells you, oh, that executable belongs to this application, all right? And guess what? This is the latest and greatest version of that executable, and it has no reported vulnerabilities. Or this one does have reported vulnerabilities, so you should be moving to this one. So, really to make that operationally manageable, you need to operate at an application level. People just want to say, yes, they have permission for Microsoft Office, Exchange, and they want to check that box off. But from a security enforcement standpoint, you have to be down in really the bits and bytes. And so to make that operationally efficient, you just kind of take some of that complexity and eliminate that so that people can kind of manage their environment. For device control, you have a high-level term for this would be data protection. All right, how are we protecting data? And there's kind of two flavors of that. You're protecting it from data loss. All right, am I going to lose a piece of data? And there's typically two technologies applied to that. Whole disk encryption for laptops if it's lost there. We really provide that facility through a partnership with PGP. And then we also, the other kind of data loss that a lot of people aren't talking about, but probably has as much risk and is also unquantifiable risk in the market today, and that's really the loss of data on USB keys. If you go to most IT departments and you said, how many laptops did you lose last year? They could tell you, pretty accurately how many machines they lost. They might even be able to tell you what the business purpose of that was and what some of the potential data that could be on that machine. If you asked them, how many USB keys did you lose last year? They'd throw their arms up and say, I have no idea, because most of the employees are providing them themselves and introducing those into the environment. And then so you say, well, you don't even know how many keys. Well, how many did you lose? Don't know that. What data was moved onto it? Don't know that either. So this is kind of an unquantifiable risk in the environment today. So we have a lot of customers who are very concerned about that, and we provide that USB key management, encrypting all of the data. So if the data is lost or stolen, that you know that that's protected. So that's kind of data protection from a loss standpoint. Then the other thing you have to really worry about in data protection is theft. So now you really have an insider who's going to try to steal that data. They obviously have access to that data. And with device control, it really is controlling how that data can move off of the endpoint. And if you think about it, most people today understand if they emailed that information out of a gateway, there'd be a record of that. There's a lot of logs on that. But there's really no logs about what data moves from a laptop onto a USB key unless you're really utilizing our technology. Application whitelisting is really trying to create a paradigm shift, trying to move away from antivirus, all right? And it's really, very targeted, or the specific limitation of antivirus is really the unknown threat. It offers no protection for that, all right? So how do you meet that need? Whitelisting is an excellent security model to protect against the unknown, all right? It's a paradigm shift from a management standpoint, as well. So I think that that slows its adoption somewhat because it is a new model. But when it can provide protection against the unknown, as well as all the known threats, because again, you're just defining the things that are allowed to run that you know to be good. Everything else is denied by default. And it's really I've been in the security industry for over 12 years now and sold a lot of different security technology. And when you talk to people, classically the conversation was you would bring up a category of threat, and then you talked about how your product dealt with that particular category of threat. How did it identify it? How did it stop it? How did it manage it? When you shift to this paradigm, and once people get the idea of it's only what you define to be good, it really doesn't matter what the new thing is anymore, all right? That you really have protection for that. At least in the context of we've applied this security model to these two areas of endpoint security.